Welcome into a Friday edition of Gold and Black Radio. I'm your host, Derek Schultz. Purdue heads into their second of 3 trophy games this season, hoping that it goes a lot better than that Shillelagh debacle against Notre Dame back in week 2. In Champaign tomorrow, they'll face a fully rested Illini team coming off a bye and looking to reclaim the cannon on their home field. Get this, for the first time since the 2010 season. That's how long it's been since Illinois has beaten Purdue in Champaign. On today's show, we're going to discuss that matchup with Illinois and provide some analysis and historical perspective as well. All the things that you come to know and love about GBR Friday, while also fitting in some hoops conversation with Brian Newbert. But first, Gold and Black Radio brought to you by the Purdue Federal Credit Union, a proud partner of Purdue Athletics and the official credit card for Purdue fans. Boiler Up, East End Grill and Ripple and Company, 2 distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street, the perfect place for your next event. And the Whitaker Inn, for unparalleled comfort and cuisine, visit the Whitaker Inn. Let's bring on goldenblack.com analyst Tom Dienhart, as we always do, for the opening segment of our Friday show. And kind of a weird stat, right, Tom? I didn't even realize that until Alan Karpick, I mean, who else, right, would know that? But he pointed out to me, the Boilers have actually won 6 straight in Champaign, dating back to 2010. They've actually won 10 of the last 12 games there, if you could believe it.
It's crazy, isn't it? One of those bizarre stats. Purdue has owned Illinois here of late, Derek. 2010, last time Illinois won on their home field against the Boilermakers. I was talking to a media member over there, head coach of that 2010 Illini team, Derek, Ron Zook. How about that?
Yeah.
We have a Ron Zook reference. We're not even 2 minutes into this thing. So, yeah, well, I'll tell you what, my friend, the odds makers are favoring Illinois to get back in the win column on their home field against Purdue this week. I think the line's up to over 20 points now. And a well-rested Illini team, of course, coming off a bye. And Derek, an Illini team that's been one of the biggest surprises in the Big Ten this year. I think we can all agree to that. They're in the polls, 4-1, 1-1 in the Big Ten, and just playing good in about every phase of the game.
Yeah, and 4-1 with a rough schedule so far, right? You know, taking on Kansas early in the season when we thought Kansas was going to be better, and then Nebraska, and they go up to Lincoln and win. Yeah. Then they go to Happy Valley to take on Penn State, and they were at least competitive, albeit in a 21-7 loss. And I think they still have Oregon coming up. I mean, they definitely drew the short straw a little bit when it came to the scheduling gods. But, like Vegas, Tom, that's kind of where I think I am as well with Purdue. I've kind of given up on the what can they do to win type questions. What can Purdue do to at least be competitive with Illinois and make this something resembling a game coming up here on Saturday?
Been so bad, all we can do is laugh through our pain, right? The pain of having to watch what we've had to watch these last 4 games in particular. What can they do to be competitive? Like you said, that's become the standard now, seemingly, for this season. As sad as that is to say, Derek, how about play with some discipline? How about not commit so many penalties? How about not take bad angles to the ball? How about tackling somebody? Some sure tackling now. How about some better pass protection? I could go on and on. Both sides of the ball have certainly had their issues. Last week we saw special teams get in on the misery with the muff punt that led to a short field. So yeah, but for me, Derek, and I think for most people who've watched this team, who've suffered through these first 5 games, it's the offense that's been the biggest catastrophe, I think.
Yeah.
I tell you what, they made the change of coordinator. Obviously, Jason Simmons is not a miracle worker. We saw some different things, but Derek, like I think I said to you on Tuesday, this dysfunction runs so deep, it cannot be fixed between Saturdays here.
No, and I think, like I said, kind of where we're at with Purdue football is that it's just about can they stabilize this thing enough to fix it whenever it can be fixed, not necessarily in October of 2024, but can they stabilize this thing over the next couple of weeks to fix it into 2025 and into the spring and all of that? Because I think, Tom, at this point, that's sort of what we're looking at. I mean, any feasible goal for this season, and we can, I think, debate on how feasible bowl eligibility was for this season, given what the schedule was, is pretty much out the window at this point. So now it's just about how much can you stop kind of the entire ship from sinking, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's taking on water, to continue your nautical theme there. I mean, we can play the fantasy. Yeah, Purdue is still only has 4 losses. They're still eligible for a bowl, but who are we kidding, right? You talked about Illinois' schedule on the lead, Derek. Well, Purdue's schedule looking forward is brutal. 7 games left. 5 will be against ranked teams. 3 of those top 10 teams, Derek. Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. So, yeah, boy, Purdue's got their work cut out for them. It's crazy to think that they would have any shot to even dream of bowl eligibility, even if Andy Reid suddenly showed up on their sideline with his play calls. So, yeah, like you said, just be competitive, look organized, look competent. Again, take a game into the fourth quarter. Those types of things. Like I said, it's too bad we're about mid-October and those have become the standards, but that's the case because anybody who's watched those last 4 games, Derek, knows how brutal it's been. Purdue's lost by an average of 35 points in those 4 games, and like I said, you wonder now at this point, will the staff be around to fix it next year? I think let's not kid ourselves and just talk in hushed tones about that. It's being discussed on message boards and at bar tables and over the water cooler at offices across central Indiana. I'm sure that will Ryan Walters be the guy who gets a chance to fix this? I don't know. We'll see.
This Illini team that they're going to see on Saturday, I think sort of looks like what they were hoping the Boilermakers would look like, right? It's a nice, balanced offense. Luke Altmaier has been very efficient at quarterback. They've got 3 or 4 running backs that they like to use who have all been pretty effective. Just kind of looking at them on paper, Tom, I'm thinking to myself, man, this is what we were hoping that Purdue was going to be this year in 2024.
Yeah, you're right. Brett Bielema really likes to lean toward being a real physical guy on offense, but Luke Altmaier has really been a difference maker for these guys. You mentioned him, Derek, 70% completion rate, I think, and just been a revelation for them. And that's one thing that had been missing under Brett Bielema was that ability to throw the ball downfield. He has a quarterback, again, in Altmaier, and he's got a couple good deep threats too. Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant have been real good targets downfield. Of course, Bielema, like I said, likes to run the ball. There's no shortage of running backs, Derek. They got 4 or 5 of them they like to use. Caden Fagan's a real big kid who's a real load, who's really the centerpiece there. But a lot of depth to carry the ball, and defensively, they've been stout as well. The secondary was a real issue last year for Illinois' defense, but the secondary has really gotten things buckled up and buttoned up back there. Xavier Scott's been great. Miles Scott, Terrence Brooks. So it's been all systems go on both sides of the ball, like you said. And this team's playing well. And Derek, let me tell you this too, my friend. I think Brett Bielema wants to lay it on Purdue here too. Obviously, the connections, all these staffers at Purdue were once on his Illinois staff. And Purdue's taken it to Illinois of late. You talked about that as well. And I think if Brett gets a chance to stick it to Purdue, I think Brett's going to take advantage of that opportunity because Brett Bielema loves to do things like that.
Well, and the blood's in the water, right? Everybody in the Big Ten knows when you got Purdue coming up on your schedule that the blood is in the water considering what the results have been to this point. Tom, thanks so much for the analysis. We're going to have your opponent view coming up here in just a little bit, but we'll bring you back on to go around the rest of the Big Ten. I think a much more interesting conference slate this week than last. Thanks so much, pal.
You bet, buddy.
It's our buddy Tom Dienhart, and we'll have his opponent view coming up here in just a second with the voice of the Illini, Brian Barnhart. But first, wanted to thank our friends at Sand Valley Resort. Celebrate all that the wilderness provides this fall and winter at Sand Valley. Experience everything from Thanksgiving dinner, curling and ice hockey, to ice fishing and snowshoeing, and even the restorative benefits of a guided cold plunge in the frozen lakes. Start planning your next winter getaway by visiting sandvalleypursuits.com. As I mentioned, Brian Barnhart, the voice of the Fighting Illini, joined Tom earlier today. And here's this week's opponent view on Golden Black Radio.
All right. Very pleased to be joined by the voice of the Fighting Illini, Brian Barnhart, an icon in Central Illinois, a good man. And Brian's going to drop some Illini knowledge on us today. Of course, Purdue's going to be in Champaign Saturday, 2:30 Central Time kickoff, FS1. Brian, welcome. Let's jump right in, my friend. Kind of tell our viewers, our listeners here, what they can expect from the Illinois offense on Saturday.
Yeah, well, Tom, good to be on with you, and I appreciate you having me. Yeah, it's the Illinois offense has really been pretty good. I mean, the passing game has really taken a step up. Luke Altmaier now is in his second season as a starter. You got to remember when he was at Ole Miss, he really didn't play that much as far as a starter, and so last year he had kind of a learning curve. And I think he got better as the season went on. He had 4 interceptions in a game against Penn State last year, and then he didn't throw very many after that. Then he got hurt, and John Paddock came in and pulled out a miraculous win at Minnesota, and then started the next 2 games, set a Memorial Stadium record for yards in the next game. And Altmaier never got back in. But he was the definite starter in the spring. He's been great this year under Barry Lunney, the second year with the same coordinator. And he's got targets to throw to. That's one thing we haven't really had at Illinois in recent years is we've had maybe one potential deep threat. Now we've got 2. And Zachary Franklin has been outstanding. Pat Bryant has been outstanding. If you look at the stats, as far as number of catches, I think they have over 40 or so between the 2 of them. And I think the next closest person is Tanner Arkin. He's got less than 10. So that's who they go to. So the passing game has been excellent, and Altmaier has been tremendously accurate. The running game probably hasn't been as strong as Illinois fans would like it to be yet. He's rotating 4 tailbacks. Caden Fagan, a young man from nearby Atwood, a little small 1A school in the area. So he's been using him a lot. Aiden Lawfrey, another kid from a small town school, Gibson City, has rotated in. He's also, of course, used a couple of other guys. Jordan Anderson's been in there and Khalil Valentine. But nobody's really, Josh McCray's the other one, but nobody's really been the lead back. They've rotated them through during the course of the season, and they haven't really run it effectively. They ran it okay against Central Michigan and against Nebraska, but against Penn State just flat out shut it down. And while the total yardage rushing wound up being less than 40, a lot of that was on sacks, but they just haven't been able to consistently run the ball the way that you think a Brett Bielema team would be able to do it with an experienced offensive line. And I know the coaches are addressing that, and did address that during the bye week.
Okay, Brian, what's that Illini defense looking like? Of course, that's Brett Bielema's side of the ball. Aaron Henry's the coordinator. Sort of give our viewers here a sense of what they can anticipate from the Fighting Illini defense.
Well, it's been a lot better than it was last year, and it's been kind of a yo-yo situation where in 2022, of course, they had Devin Weatherspoon, who wound up, of course, with the Seattle Seahawks, has been a tremendous back in the NFL, defensive back. Quan Martin was another one who was really good. And, of course, Ryan Walters at that time was the defensive coordinator. And so we had, if not the top defense, I think in the top 2 or 3 in the country that year, which helped him win 8 games. You were going to have a fall off regardless, just because it was going to be hard to replace Witherspoon and Martin and some of those other defensive backs. So last year they really struggled in the pass defense, but now they've come the other way. Now they've improved a lot. They've got some tremendous defensive backs back there. Xavier Scott has been unbelievable, 3 interceptions. Miles Scott, no relation, has been also very, very good. He has 2 interceptions. They've got Terrence Brooks, a transfer in from Texas. They've had Torrey Cox, whose dad played in the NFL, is really transferred in from Ohio. He's got a couple of interceptions. So that defensive backfield is pretty experienced and pretty deep. And so they've been much better defensively. Up front, the question this year was, could they replace Johnny Newton, who, of course, wound up in the NFL with the Commanders? And so far, they haven't completely plugged that hole. Dennis Briggs, transfer from Florida State, has been good. You've got T-Raw Edwards has been really solid, but it's taken a couple of them to try to fill that gap of when Johnny Newton was there. So I think where they got exposed for the first time up front a little bit was in the Penn State game. Illinois did not play bad, but Penn State eventually just kept hammering them on them with the running game between Singleton and Katron Allen. And by the end of the game, Illinois was just out of gas, and it wound up being a 21-7 score, but a game Illinois was certainly in and had a chance to win. And I think that was the first game where the defensive line got a little exposed by a really physical team. And I think, in some of these upcoming games, Michigan, Oregon, and so forth, they're going to have to get that corrected here over time.
Yeah, no shame in losing in State College, PA, to that Penn State team. And, of course, that brings us to the table setter here Saturday, Brian. Cannon Trophy's on the line. This has been a series Purdue has really dominated of late, winning, I think, the last 4 and 7 of 8. Brian, I don't think Illinois has won on their home field against Purdue since 2010. So, the Illini are jonesing to finally get that trophy back and hand it to Purdue, a program really struggling. Kind of give us a sense on how you think this thing's going to play out. It looks like Illinois is about an 18-point favorite or so.
Yeah, and I think Illinois fans are nervous because they know, as you mentioned, Tom, the recent history of Illinois and Purdue. I mean, Purdue's won, 4 in a row, and 7 out of 8 and 8 out of 10. And you have, as you said, you got to go back to 2010 when Illinois and was coached by Ron Zook back in 2010. That was a Texas Bowl team that was really good, a really good ball club. And that was the last time they beat Purdue in Champaign, which is hard to believe that it's been that long. And Illinois has won a couple, as you know, over in West Lafayette. But this has been a puzzling series. Purdue has been to Illinois what Illinois has been to Minnesota. We seem to have Minnesota's number in some games, and of course, Brett Bielema has never lost to Minnesota in his coaching career, whether here at Illinois or Wisconsin. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a game that Illinois fans, feel confident, like, well, we should beat Purdue. I mean, they didn't look very good last week at Wisconsin. We're home. We've had a bye week. We should be in good shape, and yet there's that nagging, but Purdue has managed to beat us so many times in a row, and how do we get that turned around? So I think the team is rested. I think there hasn't been a lot wrong with this team. This has been a really good football team. I mean, I know Kansas's record isn't very good right now, but they seem to be kind of snake bit. They've lost a lot of close games, but that was a good Kansas team they beat. That was a good win at Nebraska. And this is a team that doesn't make a lot of mistakes. They're pretty solid on both sides of the ball. Their special teams are really, really good. And they're not the flashiest team, but they're very workmanlike. And I think the one thing that Brett Bielema has done in his now 4th year is he's got a team that is, as he came in and said, consistently successful, but also, tough-minded, dependable. I know Ryan Walters talks about that a lot too, but quit doing the stuff that gets you beat and just play solid football, cover kicks, run the ball effectively, stop the run. And if you look at the ledger over the last 3.5 years, Illinois has been in about every ball game, except the one game at Purdue last year. They got handled in the second half, but you can count on one hand the games where Illinois under Brett Bielema has been flat out blown out. It just hasn't happened. And so I think the fans are confident, but a little nervous, but also thinking, hey, this should be the year we take care of Purdue because, as you know, and you cover them close, there's been a lot of dissatisfaction with the way they've played for sure in West Lafayette.
Yeah, certainly struggling over here, Brian. Everybody's eager for this rivalry game. It's always fun making the trip on I-74. As you know, just a quick 90-minute drive back and forth. So 2 schools very similar in a lot of ways, Brian. We appreciate you coming by, and I look forward to seeing you and that whole Illinois media gang on Saturday, sir.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you. Looks like good weather, too.
Yep, 85.
Thanks to Brian Barnhart for joining us for the Opponent View this week. And as is with most play-by-play guys, I'm just really jealous of that voice. That is an excellent, excellent play-by-play voice that Brian has. Wanted to remind you at goldenblack.com, you can get analysis from Tom, columns from Brian, reports, historical perspectives from people like Alan. We've got Carm on there. We've got the Saturday simulcast, Knucklehead Central. You get it all by subscribing at goldenblack.com. So please do so today while you're supporting shows like this. Joining us in our conversation is Brian Newbert. And, Brian, I always ask kind of the hard-hitting questions first when we have you. And I was thinking about this as Tom was mentioning it. I think I-74 is actually my favorite drive, either east or west, because I feel like I never, ever see any cops, and I very rarely see any trucks. And that is not the case on 65, 70, basically every other interstate that connects to Indianapolis. You're a little more road trip traveled than I am because of all your work covering Purdue on the road for all these years. But just thinking about like drivable Big Ten venues, is I-74 probably the easiest shot that you have?
Well, Fountain County cops got me a couple years ago. When they
I
saw
didn't know such thing existed. Fountain County cops.
I was going to Illinois for a basketball game in a rental car. I didn't know how to use I hadn't figured out how to use the cruise control yet. And they got me going. I think back in these days, the speed limit was still like 65. So we're going way back here. And it started in 8, we'll put it that way.
Okay.
So he pulled me over and he found out I was from Tippecanoe County, realized I was someone associated with Purdue going to the Illinois game. And he quipped about how many Purdue people they're able to pull over on Illinois game days. And I'm glad he took entertainment out of that. But he offered me the infraction deferral program, which I paid my however much money it was to not pay the ticket and for my insurance to not find out. I hope my agent's not listening right now. Had I gotten another speeding ticket, I would have had to pay that ticket. I'd already paid the deferral program fee, and I would have had to pay the second ticket. And then my insurance rates probably would have gone up. So that would have been like $1,000 ticket. And I've been driving like a little old lady ever since.
I did the deferral once, and it was for somebody had the audacity to give me a ticket for doing 52 and a 45. And I got pulled over and got a ticket for that. So that's what at Franklin, Indiana. And that's what so Johnson County got me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I wasted my ticket deferral on, was a 52 and a 45. And it was like an $85 fine.
Yeah.
But, being a radio guy and 24 years old, $85, it might as well have been $8,500.
Correct.
With where I was at that time. Look, I and we kind of talked about this with Tom. I know competitive loss is going to drive people up the wall. Like, is that the bar for Purdue now, just to be competitive, albeit in a loss? But is there something in your mind to just merely stopping the bleeding this week and at least, over the next couple of games, maybe stabilizing this program on the field so the work can sort of begin both on and off the field to fix what clearly is very, very wrong with it?
Yeah, no, it kind of rings hollow now, but like, you just need to do something positive, because right now, truth be told, there is nothing positive going on. There are no signs of optimism here. Now, the coaches might feel differently, but if they do, they're looking awful hard. To the casual observer, you just want to see them cleaning things up, getting better. And that's been the kind of the story of these last 4 weeks, where, Purdue's lost these last 4 games, and there's been very few positives, if any, to take from it. And, the second halves are the worst part of it, where something bad happens to you early in the game and the game's just over. It's just, as soon as they fumbled that punt, Wisconsin scored, I thought that game was over, and I wasn't wrong. But then the second halves, you'd like to see, a little bit more competitiveness. You'd like to see a little bit more, quote unquote fight. That's probably the most discouraging part of this to anybody who's really looking at this critically, is like, why are these games ending 66-7? And why are these games ending 52-6 against a team that's, not great? I mean, they're better than Purdue, but they're not 52-6 better than Purdue. That's where you want to kind of see a step forward here. And even if you get that, that's a pretty low bar, in the grand scheme of things. That should be kind of the general expectation every single game, and not something that surprises you when it happens. So that strikes me as a team that's not responding to its coaches, or coaches who just don't know how to get through to their players. And that's the most troubling part of this, is you sit there and you look at this, like, how much do some of these guys want to win? I'm not talking about the coaches. They obviously want to win. The players, how invested are they in this? And, things like that. Maybe you see that Saturday, but even if you do, it's probably too little too late. You needed it a month ago to make something of this season. It's never, I've always thought it's never as bad as it seems. It's never as good as it seems, but right now it seems pretty bad. And I don't know how you get out of it in the short term.
On the flip side of things, we talked a little basketball as you came back from Big Ten Media Day last week on Tuesday's show. And, I kind of asked Tom, can the football team do something positive? So I'll present this, for a team that's picked to win the Big Ten again for the third straight year. I'll kind of flip this around and do something maybe a little bit negative here, Brian. What's your biggest concern for the team heading into the season? I think the easy answer is to be like, well, they lose the 2-time National Player of the Year, right? But, something that you're looking at right now and you're saying, man, this could kind of jump up and bite this squad in 24-25.
I think rebounding, things like that, the stuff you took for granted when Zach Edey was around. Like, I don't think people realize, yes, Zach Edey got 12 rebounds a game, whatever it might be, but he created probably 20. And I think, rebounding's been a pretty consistent strength for Purdue since long before Edey. And it's something that needs to be carried on. Offensive rebounding especially has been a big deal. Mason Gillis was a big part of that, but even Mason Gillis, that was a lot of Edey's presence too. And I just think Purdue, it's kind of the natural ebb and flow of college basketball where as guys come and go, what strengths and what identities kind of continue on. And that's something where Purdue has to make sure that the attention to detail and rebounding, the effort in rebounding is something that really, really was passed down from some great rebounding teams to these future teams to come. And that's one question. I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a concern, like something that's going to derail their season. But I think that's one of the big things that's going to be really interesting to watch. There is a lot of unknown about this team too. So I could probably talk for much longer than we have here. But there is a lot of unknown stuff here. There's going to be inexperience in the rotation for the first time in a while. So you never know how that's going to go, especially with guys who are going to have the ball in their hands. When you have freshman guards, I think that's probably one of the most terrifying things coaches can live through. But I think Purdue's guys are not as scary as a lot of freshman ball handlers would be. I think they really like C.J. Cox and Jakari Harris, but that's always something that you got to keep an eye on. Just ball handling in general. I think Purdue, had an unbelievable luxury last year with Lance Jones, where he was essentially a second point guard on the floor at all times. His speed really made a big difference. So just kind of some of that stuff, some of the stuff in terms of, being able to handle the ball, being able to play at the tempo you want to play at, and, kind of things like that. But rebounding and ball handling are two big ones.
To give our listeners a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, we're going to slowly start to kind of implement more and more men's basketball talk as the weeks go by. And you guys, I'm sure we're not going to get any complaints about that, Brian, considering where football is right now. So we'll continue to kind of lean heavily on you when it comes to our hoop stuff. But we're going to talk to Alan here in just a second, and we'll bring you back for our Big Ten look around. Sure. Thanks as always.
I always know how a football season's going based on how early the basketball questions start coming.
That's Brian Newbert, goldenblack.com. And Brian was with traveling, obviously, Big Ten Media Days and all of that last week. And this week, it's actually Alan that had the conflict with our Friday show. So I actually had the chance to catch up with him a little bit earlier today to bring you our historical segment. And here's my conversation with Alan and looking back on all of the years, about 100 meetings between Purdue and Illinois in the battle for the Cannon. Thanks so much for tuning in to this Friday edition of Golden Black Radio. I'm your host, Derek Schultz, and let's welcome on the publisher of Golden Black and goldenblack.com, also the unofficial Purdue football and men's basketball historian. It's our pal, Alan Karpick. And Alan, last week we spent so much time talking about that losing skid to Wisconsin. I don't know how much longer this is going to last, probably another 24 to 28 hours here, but yeah. I want to at least celebrate the fact that we could talk about a winning streak for Purdue going into this matchup with Illinois.
A winning streak, really an amazing one if you think about it. They've won 6 consecutive games in Champaign. Now, they've lost twice at home during that period, But the fact is, Purdue has won, going back to Danny Hope's last year in 2012. They've won each game in Memorial Stadium, and that's really interesting when you think about that. Interesting up to a point, I should say. But the fact that that's the second longest road winning streak against a Big Ten team. They've never beaten IU 6 times in a row on the road. Now they beat Iowa 8 times in a row from 1962 to 1979, that 20-year victory streak. And that's hard to believe that Purdue beat Iowa 20 consecutive years. But yeah, that streak is on the line. The clock is ticking. But right now, Purdue holds a 6-game streak.
And a little bit of a mentor-mentee type thing, because when Brett Bielema took the Illinois job, he took Ryan Walters with him, right? So 2021 first season, Walters is on that staff with Bielema, of course, the defensive coordinator, and then has success in 22 and parlays that into the Purdue job starting in 23. And we saw last year Ryan get the best of his mentor. He'll have the chance to do that, I guess, again here. And there have been a couple of times in history, Alan, I know, kind of going back here, where you've had a mentee versus a mentor, or vice versa, when it comes to a Purdue coaching matchup.
Well, it is, and you have to go back to Jim Coletto and John Cooper, of course, at Ohio State. Coletto was Ohio State's offensive coordinator, gets the job. George King hires him after Fred Akers was dismissed. They went at it 4 or 5 times. Jim Coletto did not have success against his mentor, and that may be a little bit of it. Well, but actually, Coletto worked for Cooper at Arizona State as well. Went with him to Ohio State when he took that job. So it is a little bit of an interesting tie-in. And you may go back to also Jim Young and Bo Schembecker way back in the day. And it's kind of a loose tie-in. The fact that Jim Young, of course, Purdue's head coach from 1977 to 1981, was Bo's defensive coordinator. Actually, when Bo had a heart attack in the 1970 Rose Bowl, Jim Young coached Michigan in that game. And, of course, Jim went on to Arizona as the head coach. So he didn't go right from assistant to Purdue's head. He went into Arizona as a head coach and, of course, was hired in late 1976 to coach Purdue. So there have been some of those storylines. It's always interesting to see that when that happens. And, of course, much has been made about Brett Bielema and Ryan Walters and that relationship dating back to Ryan's time in Champaign for a couple of years.
We know IU obviously is the rivalry game in all sports. In football, I think Notre Dame would probably be the fan second pick. And, of course, those are 2 trophy games. This is the third of the trophy games. But to me, Alan, and maybe this is me speaking just as a 41-year-old, it's always felt a little bit oddly placed. Do I feel that way because Purdue's really largely had the upper hand in this series the last 30 years? They've won 18 to 24, or is it, the fact that generally speaking, Illinois to me has been, I think, one of the underachievers of Big Ten football for many, many years. It feels like they've had some great players that have come through there, but they really just haven't had a whole heck of a lot. I mean, I remember like the Rashard Mendenhall Rose Bowl team, and I think Jack Trudeau took them to they lost to UCLA maybe in the Rose Bowl.
They got
84,
killed
85,
by UCLA.
Yeah. Whatever that was. But, I'm talking about you can count on one hand, I feel like, when you talk about the great Illinois football moments.
It is interesting. They've risen up a couple of times and surprised people. I mean, the year that it was at 2001, the year after Purdue went to the Rose Bowl, and that
Kirk
was in the
Hinton,
Rose Bowl year, right? And they end up going to the Sugar Bowl as the Big Ten representative. It has really been interesting. Is it a rivalry? They've said over the years that it was more of a rivalry for Illinois because they didn't really have a rival, though Northwestern has become one, I guess. And the fact that these 2 schools are literally, I think, within about a mile or 2. I think Purdue to Champaign is like 2 miles closer than Purdue to Bloomington, or the other way around. One or the other, Derek. But it is that there is proximity. There's always the Beef House where Purdue fans can go eat. But in Covington, they're not even a sponsor. But they have. That's where everybody kind of celebrates. Both Illinois and Purdue fans usually celebrating some level of drudgery with the football programs. But you're right, Illinois has underachieved. When you think about Chicagoland having some control there, and the state it sits in, it is interesting how the Fighting Illini have really not been a great program historically when they kind of quote unquote own their state. You know, Purdue can't say that in the state of Indiana, obviously, with Notre Dame and Indiana floating around. It's hard to do that in football.
Beef House, I wonder how much, if they could measure the value that Zach Eady's tweet of Beef House in all caps last year provided for them. Because
that
that trip.
Derek, with all due respect to East End and Ripple, and we love them to death, and they're in Lafayette. But you know, it's funny. The Beef House is really has been a staple, and yes, Zach Eady's helped them. The Wright family that owns that restaurant, it has been a meeting place many times. And yes, Zach Eady didn't hurt there, but their business is pretty good there. It's pretty amazingly good. Has been for years, and a fun place to go if you're going to Purdue-Illinois. It's the perfect stopping spot. If you can get in after a football game, boy, it can get crowded there for that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not worried about them keeping the lights on over there at Beef House.
No, they're doing okay.
Alan, we appreciate it as always. And, you know, I would say we're looking forward to this matchup. It's tough to really kind of look forward to everything, to anything with the way that they've been playing here lately. But again, you know, it's a rivalry game. It's a trophy game. Purdue only has 3 of those on the schedule. So I think from that element, fans can look forward to this matchup coming up here against the Illini in Champaign and see if they can find anything to hope for here moving forward this season.
Well, I think the one thing when you're covering this, and certainly Tom Dienhart and you and Brian, you know, we try to take a look at this and say, we're going to play it straight up. Yes, it's a tough season. It's a very tough situation, but they got a chance. You know, they're playing on Saturday. You never know what's going to happen, and there's always a historical perspective because there's a trail of games to be played, and it'll be fun to look back at that. It's always a fun segment for me to be able to do it. So we'll muddle through. There's worse things in the world, and these two teams will tee it up on Saturday at 3:30.
Thanks so much, Alan. Appreciate it as always.
All right, thanks, Derek.
Thanks again to Alan Karpick for joining us as he does each and every week. Wanted to remind you that Golden Black Radio brought to you by our friends at the Whitaker Inn. This Midwestern oasis is perfect for a relaxing staycation or a weekend getaway. Escape from the ordinary at the Whitaker Inn. Let's go ahead and bring back both Tom Dienhart and Brian Newbert as we go around the Big Ten. And guys, a much more interesting week in the conference, notably because I think one of the most anticipated matchups of the entire season, Ohio State's trip out to Autzen, in a battle of 2 versus 3. I know you've been really high on Oregon, Tom, and everybody's been high on Ohio State. Who do you like in that matchup? Do you lean towards the home team just because they're at home?
I think so. You know, back in July, when all the college football magazines came out, when we were at Big Ten Media Day, we all thought these were going to be the 2 best teams in the Big Ten. Here we are, Derek. The showdown is here as we anticipated. 5-0 versus 5-0. Number 2, Ohio State versus number 3, Oregon. Yeah, I do like the Ducks on their home field, and I like their quarterback a little bit better too, Dylan Gabriel. I'm not sure what the official line is. I'm sure it's maybe Oregon's given 3 points or so. Maybe it's a pick 'em, but it should shape up to be a great game. And obviously, whoever loses is still very much in the hunt for a college football playoff bid. But you certainly want to win, and who knows, this could be a preview of the Big Ten title game as well.
Yeah, the other game, Brian, that I kind of had my eye on, and much less so, I mean, clearly the marquee game, not only in the Big Ten, but in the entire country, is Ohio State, Oregon. You know, Penn State going all the way out to USC. They did go to West Virginia in week 1, but basically has been living at home ever since then. And I don't know, you know, I think Penn State, whether it's fair or unfair, they still kind of have a rep for flopping in games like this, don't they, against better opponents?
I think that the cross-country trip is a real difference maker. The results have obviously underscored that. So I would tend to like USC in this game for that reason more than any. But I also think that USC has experienced some Big Ten toughness that they've not responded terribly well to. I think when you look at Minnesota, how Minnesota was able to just grind that game away at the very end. Maybe they weren't doing that in the Pac-12 before. I think, you know, going to Michigan and being talented enough alone to, you know, be right there in the second half and then have Michigan bust a big run because they're better at the line of scrimmage than you are. Penn State's going to be more of that. Now, whether or not that translates to going, 3 time zones or whatever, I think the record is 1-8 so far from Big Ten teams who have gone across the country to play. It would be, I guess, 1-9 if you counted Purdue losing at Oregon State. I might have that mixed up in my head, but I'll take Penn State, but I'll take Penn State with extreme prejudice here.
Yeah, looking around too, just that last week, Tom, we had talked about, this is a light week. Nothing's really going to happen. And then they're throwing the goalposts into the Cumberland River in Vanderbilt, right? Whereas, one of this, huge epic upset, probably the biggest win in Vanderbilt football history, for God's sake, at least in their modern history, laking the post and rivering the post, I should say, and beating Alabama. How much do you think, and Tennessee losing and everything else, how much do you think last week will have a ripple effect on this college football playoff and the 12-team field? Because obviously there's more margin for error for all these teams. But at the same time, I think the errors were not expected for a lot of these squads.
Yeah, you're right. Like you said, I think that's what sort of diminishes the severity of these losses. Is you do have that margin of error now with the 12-team college football playoff. You can lose 1, 2, who knows, maybe 3 games, depending on who those 3 losses are to. But yeah, so again, there's not that catastrophic feeling when you lose a ball game. That certainly doesn't take away the sense of urgency if you lost a game like that, obviously. And if you are going to lose, you want to make sure it's a quality loss. You don't want it to be to Vanderbilt on the road or at Arkansas for Tennessee, something of that ilk. So yeah, there's no doubt about you never know. Every year we're like this. At least I'm like that. You think things are going to play out a certain way, and then you get these crazy, chaotic Saturdays. And last Saturday was certainly that, Derek. And another unbeaten, more off to out of the spotlight, obviously, that went down was Rutgers last week at Nebraska. Well, what Rutgers has Wisconsin coming in to New Brunswick this weekend, and maybe old Noobsy, being a Jersey guy, can talk a little bit about that. But Rutgers, can they rebound, and what kind of momentum will Wisconsin have going out east? That's a good game too, guys. In Washington at Iowa. Of course, Washington with the big win last week. The Heartland, right, against the Hawkeyes, the Hawkeye team that's smarting from that loss at Ohio State. So those are 2 other games that sort of have my attention.
Yeah, should be good. Much better slate, not only for the Big Ten, but just for the country in general to look around. And then, of course, we'll have our attention in Champaign, Purdue, and Illinois for a 3:30 kick and a renewal of that rivalry for the Cannon. Tom and Brian, thanks so much. We'll hear from you on the Saturday simulcast, and hope you enjoy the game tomorrow.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Derek.
That's Tom Dienart and Brian Newbert, and that's our show for tonight, a Gold and Black Friday edition, Gold and Black Radio here at goldenblack.com. Wanted to give a final thanks to our sponsors, the Purdue Federal Credit Union, the official credit card from Purdue fans, East End Grill and Ripple and Company, 2 distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street in Lafayette. The Whitaker Inn, this Midwestern oasis, perfect for a relaxing staycation or weekend getaway. Escape from the ordinary at the Whitaker Inn. And the Sand Valley Resort. Celebrate all that the wilderness provides this fall and winter at Sand Valley. Start planning your next winter getaway by visiting sandvalleypursuits.com. And don't forget to become a subscriber right here at goldenblack.com. I'm your host, Derek Schultz. We'll see you next time. Be sure to tune in for the Saturday simulcast coming up tomorrow following Purdue and Illinois.